Welcome back to County Board Wrap Up and this month's big story, which is the potential renaming of Lee Highway here in Arlington. I am joined now by Board Chair Matt DeFerenti as well as Board Member Christian Dorsey. Now, we had a lot of discussion from the public at this month's board meeting on the pros and cons of renaming Lee Highway into Langston Boulevard, which was the name brought forth by the Lee Highway Working Group. But let's start off, let's take a few steps back. And for those who may not be aware of some of the story, can you give us a little bit of background on why the move was made to consider renaming Lee Highway in the first place?
Sure, Kara. There's a number of factors. This has been discussed for some time, but really I think we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years a change in our country and a heightened awareness in our community of what the name Lee Highway means. We've seen first that Robert E. Lee made a fundamental choice, which is anathema to a lot of the values that we as a community want to be all about. And that was his defining choice to work towards a Virginia that at the time was inhumane towards our fellow Americans. And so over the last couple of years, there's been heightened conversations, but this has been something we've recognized for some time. And I suppose a couple of actions and the way that things have occurred, there was the change in the name to Richmond Highway from Jefferson Davis, which Mr. Dorsey led the board at that time. And then there's also the changing of the name Washington and Liberty High School from Washington and Lee. There's also been some changes in the direction that the state as a whole is going in, and that is relevant, as is, I think, the racial reckoning that followed the murder of George Floyd. And, you know, if you think about how I was taught about Robert E. Lee 30 years ago when I was in Virginia public schools just across from Fairfax County, it was that, he made a choice, he was loyal to his state. That history, we now all know, if we're paying attention, was wrong and racist. And we need now to align our place names with our values. And that's what this step is about. So a step forward that we started last month. We all fully anticipate taking the final steps next month. And we should also talk a little bit, maybe, Christian, you can talk a little bit about there's legislative change in Richmond that made this possible. So that's my perspective. Christian, I don't know if you had thoughts to add there.
Well, so many, Matt, and that was really terrific. And I know that, you know, whether it's Robert E. Lee or even a little bit with Jefferson Davis or the whole host of Confederate memorials and monuments and places in our country, what we typically hear from people is, well, I'm a little concerned that you're looking to rewrite or erase history. And I appreciate engaging with people on that, because there have been historians who've spilled lots of ink talking about Robert E. Lee. And there will probably be people who are steadfast in belief that, it's not evil to have him on places of honor. I don't want to have that debate. I want to look at when they decided to name Route 29 Lee Highway. You got to remember that that was a road that existed before that. It was the Georgetown Road and the Falls Church Road and the Little Falls Road. It wasn't always designated as Robert E. Lee Highway. That came not in 1866 or 1867 or 1897. It came in 1922 during a national movement to seek to rewrite history, as if it wasn't that the Confederacy wasn't about upholding the institution of slavery, as if the Confederacy had actually prevailed. So we saw movements to create a Jefferson Davis Highway, successful, a Lee Highway, successful, all during a period where our country sought to reclaim the narrative, rewrite the history of the 19th century so that we would have this reimposition of Confederates on public places throughout the United States. And that is fundamentally objectionable to my modern eye. So I don't even mean to get into the debate about Robert E. Lee. Let's look at what was the legislative intent at the time. And I think we can hopefully all agree that we reject that. And that's what I think the General Assembly did. They didn't want to say that, it's got to be named this over Robert E. Lee. They didn't get into that debate. They said at the end of the day, the community, the citizens of Arlington have the right to determine what their road is called. And that's a principle that I can support.
Now, this is a discussion that then came before the Lee Highway Alliance that developed a specific working group to look at renaming. Can you tell me a little bit about the name that they eventually came forth with, Langston Boulevard?
Sure. Well, John M. Langston was the first Black congressperson elected from Virginia and has a link to Arlington in that he was the administrator for the Freedmen's Bureau and spent time in Freedmen's Village. So those links are very important, and really appreciate the work of this Lee Highway Alliance working group. They'll also, I understand, likely rename, but they were thorough. They did a lot of community engagement, and I think that community engagement has played a strong role in, we didn't have anyone testify at our first conversation in opposition to this change. And I understand there are going to be some who have concerns about the cost. But for me, the work that they did in getting community engagement, and then they were thorough about the names that they brought forward. And John M. Langston, we might initially have preferred the Loving name, which is a very important case, Richard Loving in the 1967 Supreme Court case. But we wanted to be respectful of the family there. And luckily, our Lee Highway Working Group had been thorough and had come with this second name. So John M. Langston, the more that I learn about the history there, the more pleased I am with the direction we're headed. Even, first blush, it makes sense. The more you learn about him, the more excited I am that we're changing this, and not only changing the first part of it, but from highway to boulevard, which we think is going to have a beneficial impact on how we look at the street and businesses engage, and also that there's a little more of a pedestrian-friendly piece to this entire stretch of this critical road in our community. So I'm looking forward to it, and we're certainly, out of an abundance of caution, we wanted to have a first conversation and then a next conversation so that all of the concerns can be raised before we take action in July.
Let's talk about that, because, this came before the board at the June meeting. However, the manager's office recommended, or staff recommended, and you chose to accept those recommendations and actually defer adoption until July. What went into that decision to actually defer making this adoption?
Well, this is one I think, Christian, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because it is the manager, but it is, the board was also involved in this conversation. And Christian, over to you.
Even though it sounds like, we've got it all figured out and where everything is ready to wrap up in a neat little bow, there is still a little bit of work that we need to do. Part of which is just the dimensions of the road itself. It's actually not one linear straight Route 29. We've got a couple of places where it's named Lee Highway, so we have to coordinate with the Virginia Department of Transportation on how we're going to treat that particular section. We've got a nice recommendation that we're working towards, but final agreement has yet to receive dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's. And then we also realized one of the ways in which the legislature allowed localities to make these changes on their own initiative was to also require them to bear all of the costs for updating signage. And as you know, Route 29 is not just a thoroughfare through Arlington. It is one that is immediately accessible via off-ramps from I-66. So there is actually a substantial amount of signage that needs to be updated, changed, to effectuate this name change. And we don't quite yet know how much it's going to cost. And, one of the principles that I think we all have is that we are not going to commit to an action until we can be very clear and transparent about what it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. So we just need a little bit more time to get that all in a row, I think, before we're ready to truly have a public hearing, when we're able to answer any and all questions and concerns about this issue.
And then just to kind of wrap up, symbolically, what would the renaming of this thoroughfare mean for the county?
Well, I think on that one, I'll have brief thoughts, but and I don't know that I've quite expressed it this way, but and then I want to send it to you, Christian, of course. But the more that I learned in college about the actual history of our country, you learned about that there's multiple different challenges in our country, and one was the inaction in the period of slavery of moderates who acted as though they were good people but didn't act for humanity of all Americans at that early stage. And then further all the way through, candidly, the civil rights movement, when we saw not just very radical, terrible groups, but also moderates not stepping up. And this is different. But in some sense, I feel like our country and our county are moving to a place, and this is just my honest thought, to a place where you have to stand for racial justice, at least be actively anti-racism. And I think that this name change, because the principal legacy for me of Robert E. Lee is so linked to a fundamental decision that I disagree with to my core, I think this is a way that we're changing a symbol to look forward to a different history. And we can still learn about Robert E. Lee, of course, but do so in a context that is more inclusive than ever. So that's maybe more than a few words, but that's my honest take on the symbol. And Christian, I know you'll have thoughts too.
And, there's a healthy debate about this very question throughout our community. And I'll say for me, I do view this as symbolic. When we effectuate this name change, it will not improve anyone's wages. The quality of their job won't give them better access to health care. It won't improve their life outcomes, not a whit at all. And for many people of color who have endured elements of discrimination and racism that are far more concrete than what the name of a road they may travel on, this is probably not even going to change the trajectory of their psychological outlook. However, that doesn't mean it's not important to do. When you have the opportunity, when you gain the opportunity to do the right thing, passing on that opportunity is problematic. And we have that opportunity. We have engaged our community. We've done everything the right way. And for us not to follow through and proceed would be the wrong thing to do. And so, for me, I don't think you don't ever fail, no matter how significant or insignificant, in doing the right thing. And this is a chance for us to do the right thing. And even if someone views this symbol and it gives them inspiration to seek justice in another way, that's more than enough. But let's not allow the fact that this will not change the world prevent us from just doing the right thing.
Okay, well, we will leave it there. I can't think of a better way to wrap up that topic. But of course, there was plenty more to discuss from this month's board meeting, and that's where we're now turning to you, the viewers. We're going to answer your questions on some of the hot issues and let you know how you can participate in the discussion when we come right back.